Michelle, after a crazy last week of college football, we have the final list before the championship games this week. And coming in at number one, we already know Georgia. Number two, Michigan after their dominant win against Ohio State. Three, TCU. Four, USC, with Ohio State at 5 and Alabama at 6. Two outside looking in, and we're going to talk about how all these teams have a chance to get into college football playoffs. But before that, let's kind of go over the 4 teams that are playing this weekend. Starting with that Friday matchup, USC is playing the Pac-12 championship against Utah, a rematch of their early loss this year. TCU plays Kansas State in the Big 12 championship. Michigan is going to beat Purdue in the Big 10 championship. I mean, that's not even a competition. And then Georgia has LSU in the SEC championship game. So before going into this, we both think that 2 teams, the number 1 and the number 2 seeds, are a lock to get in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think whether or not Michigan and Georgia win these games this weekend, I do think they're going to win comfortably so their respective conference championships. But even if they lose, I still think both Georgia and Michigan are locks. What's interesting is when you go down to 3 and 4 with TCU and USC, if TCU loses or USC loses, I think that opens the door then for Ohio State to slide right in there as a one-loss, not conference champion. If both TCU and USC lose, that's where things get really interesting, because then it definitely opens the door for Ohio State, but it also allows the Alabama Crimson Tide to creep in there, which, of course, there wouldn't be a college football playoff discussion if Alabama wasn't involved somehow. But I think that's a reasonable possibility for how number 6 Alabama could get into the playoff. It just needs TCU and USC to both lose, because even if, for either of those 2 teams, to be honest, if they're a 1-loss team or a 2-loss team for USC and don't win their conference championship game, I don't see the College Football Playoff Committee giving either of those schools and programs the benefit of the doubt when it comes to naming the Final Four here.
Yeah, and no other team playing in the conference championship game this weekend has a chance. None of the opponents that I just mentioned, if they win, they have a case to get in. It's not happening. If you're a top 4 seed, you're pretty much a lock to get in if you win. You could see USC jump TCU depending on how their outcomes come. But you're right, Alabama is definitely in the conversation. We've seen them make it without being a conference champion. I could see the committee possibly voting them in as the first 2-loss seed to get in, because they lost without Bryce versus Tennessee, and then they had that LSU loss. But Alabama is a draw no matter what they're playing, who's playing. People want to see Alabama in the championship game. And imagine if you had Georgia, Alabama to be the first round. I mean, that would be pretty much must-see TV. And like you said, if TCU or USC loses, Ohio State has a case. If the top 2 seeds loses, they're getting in. It doesn't matter. But USC, we'll see what happens on Friday versus Utah. They have that game to replace what happened in the beginning of the season, a loss to Utah early. And if you're TCU, you can't get in as a 1-loss regular season Big 12 favorite. They're going to put in a Power 5 school, Ohio State or Alabama possibly, if it comes down to it. So if you're top 4, win, get in. If you're Ohio State, 1 team needs to lose. If you're Alabama, hopefully 2 teams needs to lose.
I agree with you there all around. If the top 4 teams win, they're all in. That's kind of a given. But I will say that if USC comes out and has a dominant performance in a rematch against Utah, it only lost to Utah by 1 point during the regular season. If USC comes out and absolutely dominates that game and wins, whereas if TCU maybe only squeaks by Kansas State in the Big 12 championship game, then I think you have a real shot at USC jumping TCU for that number 3 spot and TCU being number 4.